Yes, I finally have returned to the world of the internet, and I'm I kind of returned yesterday, but I have a friend, her named Nicole Rios, and she did an interview with me yesterday for about an hour and a half, and we just talked about the history of communism and what kind of things are going on. Especially talked a lot about what's going on in Minnesota. So I put a link to her channel in the description below if people want to go and check that out and see what else I've been up to. I've been fooling around a lot with AI recently, and I should be able to probably start in the future doing these daily videos again, and B, working on like getting an AI intro and outro done, because I was able to find someone who wasn't going to charge me for the entire year. So that was kind of my thoughts on that. But yeah, I'm meaning to get back into doing these things. You know, the holidays happen, you get busy doing other things. But yeah, so one of the things I wanted to talk today is react to this guy, Rich Does Politics. He also goes by Crypto Rich, but he decided to make his Rich Does Politics the politics channel, and his other channel like his crypto stuff and interviews on that. So he's splitting up his thing there. Now he's involved in the Tom Luongo space that if you've been following the geopolitics today stuff, we often talk about that. Now they're going to be talking about some stuff here, and I'm going to put in my commentary wherever I feel it's needed, because I feel I have to explain terms to a lot of the audience who is not familiar with what's going on here. But this is some of this is what I believe is going on. I'm not. Anyways.
Good, productive peoples their rage is rising. It's getting to the kind of place where it's almost Reconquista kind of level. This, financialist regime has stolen a century and a half worth of human productivity. Revolution, if there's a second one in the United States, won't be against the British. It's going to be against our own government, who are the British.
Is a revolution coming to the United States 250 years after the last revolution? Is Trump instigating it? Or is it something that the enemies of Trump are doing? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Hi, everybody. It's Wednesday, the 28th of...
Yeah, and that's something we got to say. I look at this as like, sometimes I don't look at necessarily as Trump is doing it. Sometimes I look at its factions that are operating into doing stuff. Sometimes I think it's just civilizational forces that we are caught up in cycles of this, and this is what's happening. So those are kind of my working theories. I've heard other ones.
January, I'm recording at 8 minutes past 10 in the evening. I'm joined by E.M. Burlingame and Ivor Cummings. I'll have their links in the description below. Now, for all of you that are subscribed, that are commenting, that are watching, that are sharing, that are giving the thumbs up, thank you so much. Please carry on doing that, because it helps this channel grow and it helps beat the algorithm. Hey, E.M. Hey, Ivor. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Hey, Reg.
Yeah, the last time we were together was in September on my old channel, which is still up, but I now post here because this is pure politics. Rich Does Politics is the name of the channel. So we had the stuff that was going on in Minnesota, the tragic deaths of 3 protesters, the vilification of ICE for doing law enforcement. And then I think what happened is the government released, or somebody released, some signal information which showed that the lieutenant governor was involved in organizing these protests. I did a...
Yeah, so yeah, that's something that's going on there. The lieutenant governor of Minnesota has actively been in conspiracy with the protesters. That's a serious thing right there. We've also just seen that they dropped like 16 warrants on protesters today, and like the Signal chat group, as Tom Luongo has been pointing out, is probably, see, instead of going through the normal law process, leak it to civilians, let them take the credit, and let them do that. So we all know these terrible things are going on, but why don't we instigate like Nick Shirley to go in there and as a citizen journalist, because he can go and do these things where the feds might get blocked by a warrant, by the judges not issuing warrants because they're bypassing the judiciary and going straight to the people.
Video with Joaquin Flores where we talked about how these protests were astroturfed with big money coming in. And Tim Walz and Trump have a conversation. There's an about turn. The police, the local police move in, do police operations, break up the protests. And now what's going to happen? EM, I'll come to you first.
We have a Leviathan in the form of of liberal democracy, and it's coming to its end, inevitable end, as it always does, right? 250 to 300 years, 350 years is the longest it lasts. When you have this vast bureaucratic state that is so involved in so much corruption at every level, vast corruption beyond anything that people have imagined before, it will not go away without a fight. And this is how revolutions happen. People are, the faith and confidence in liberal democracy as an institution is pretty much gone. And I don't see anything that they can do to restore it.
Wow. Wow. But what?
Yeah. So now he's mentioned that, the cycle of the last 250, 350 years. And a lot of this stuff is just like, before we had industrialization, what would happen is a civilization would rise, it'd get some food surpluses, the population would expand, and then eventually there was a drought. And the priest class would come into an existence. This overbearing class of people who don't actually do anything. The bureaucracy, they can only exist in city-states when there is a food surplus. Until industrialization, we were always stuck in this Malthusian dialect of where every so often, there would be a few bad droughts and the cities would fall apart, right? Eventually, we got to the point where we had nation states so even though one city fell apart, necessarily the rest could hold on instead. But this has allowed for the invention of our so-called management class that don't do anything but fill forms. Like the British Empire was once run at the turn of the century, 1/3 of the planet, by 50,000 people in England. England now has 600,000 civil servants. That's the kind of thing we need to worry about.
What about all the people that voted for Trump and they voted for the illegals to be deported and they voted for the borders to be closed? They're getting what they voted for.
Well, absolutely. But again, what did Kennedy say a couple of weeks before he died, right? 10 days before he died, we were set against by a vast conspiracy. And then he died 10 days later or so, right? Assassinated. This liberal democratic, fraud and corruption regime is hundreds of years old. It was it was fostered by the Venetians. It's over 1,000 years on. It's in everything. It's riddled through everything. It's broken everything, stolen everything. Of course, we'll try and preserve what we can preserve, because what are the alternatives? We go back to feudalism. Well, the truth of the matter is we already have feudalism. We just don't accept it. It's in the form of this vast wealth disparity. And instead of, the traditional manorial estates, now it's vast investment portfolios.
Yes.
Family offices, multifamily family offices, multi-generational family offices. These are all, this is a return to feudalism.
Yep.
And we just have the imprimatur of, self-rule. And now that imprimatur, the illusion of it is coming down right in front of people's eyes.
Ivor?
Yeah, well, So we're looking at making a new movie on Tragedy and Hope by Carroll Quigley. I know EM will know it, and you know it too. And I kind of always looked at our problem being the globalist banksters running the show, there you go. Mm. The Rothschilds, the Warburgs, the Wallenbergs, and all of Wall Street, and kind of the Crown in England and City of London, and they're all like Alex Crane.
Yeah, that's what I kind of say. Like the British institutional people. You'll have a lot of people talk about the British Empire or the City of London, but this is just what happened. Is during the Second World War, for Americans, you were co-opted by, you were first really brought in. Your entire elite was co-opted by the British elite into, well, not, I shouldn't say the entire elite, but most of the elite got co-opted into the British elite, and they purged out some of the people like the John Birch Society and other groups like that in order for you to have, they basically said, because before World War I, or free trade was the British, all of your principles became, after Second World War, became the British type of thing. And so I don't want to say necessarily British crown. We hear the crown, we hear all this other stuff. There's some interesting stuff from Canada's perspective I've learned in the last few months that are also interesting, which we'll get into in a later video. Crypto Rich is a good guy to get a lot of stuff from because he's got the contacts I don't have.
Says this Ponzi of fiat money that they profit from enormously, they need to keep stealing other countries' collateral. That's why we get all the wars, yada, yada, yada. But when I read Tragedy and Hope 101, it's at joeplummer.com, PLUMMER.com. So it's the short version. It's only a few hours read. I said, it's the network. And it kind of originated broadly with Cecil Rhodes and the Milner Group. And then it grew. The City of London took over America again and got Wall Street back, and all the banksters came in, all the big families. So it's an easy way for me to view it. And I viewed the Biden
and they like to scapegoat the Jews, by the way,
administration as being puppets of that network that brought us COVID and brought us most of the horror of the last 100 years, including the 2 world wars. And the Fed and the income tax in America, and they had Woodrow Wilson as a puppet they put in 1913. So I view that as the big problem. The big question for me now is most of the trouble is coming still from the Democrat left, who are puppets of the network, the globalists. And then the big question for...
And a lot of Republicans too. People just don't understand the history and the hidden layers behind things. You kind of get co-opted in like a secret society and don't realize what's happening.
For me is Trump pushing up against them? Is Trump trying to make a new America, Don Roe doctrine and get things fixed up a little? And he's pushing back against the globalists, like recently in Davos, and all the media they own, they hate him. The network seems to hate him. But the question is he really just with them, but very cleverly a form of controlled opposition at the highest level, that he's giving populist stuff like we're going to stop migration and we're going to get rid of woke, but it's all a scam. And Trump is really in with them. And that's the thing that I struggle with.
Which is an answer to the question, which could be an answer to the question I said at the beginning. Is it Trump that's stoking this revolution that's coming? Or is it the opposition, or like you're saying, it's a sting. Well, he's setting us up.
Well, one thing I have to say, people don't understand. I've only recently learned this. I've been recently learning lots of things, right? But one guy said, Trump is a creation. Trump was recruited. There was already a group of people like Steve Bannon and others, like the guy who's running against Lindsey Graham for the Senate, and that they went out and recruited Trump to be the America First, because all these groups of national populists had been looking to get going. So people talk about elite defection needing to happen to allow for a revolution to happen. Well, this was American elites inside the United States that were trying to find a vehicle like Ross Perot or Donald Trump, who couldn't be bought by making themselves rich, right? AOC had got a lot so revolutionary once they started giving her ability to make money on the stock market, right?
Broadly speaking, I got to be careful here now and remember everything Trump's doing. But he's gone up against the climate pseudoscience. I won't say the words that trigger. But you know what the climate thing is. It's Rockefeller, Rothschild from the 50s. It's complete doo-doo.
Malthusian. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, and it's so technically stupid. It took me around a day to look into it after the COVID thing. And I could not believe how absurd the whole lot is. And I'm an engineer, like. And
yeah, I was on to environmentalism as a scam pretty early on in my life in my 20s. I was reading a lot of Jerry Purnell's Chaos Manor blog at the time, and he had the same question as well. I'm just totally a Purnell conservative. I read a lot of his stuff, and that's kind of the baseline of my political philosophy. There's definitely evil in this world, and good people need to fight against it.
Physics guy, it's absurd. So Trump is going up against that madness. He's going up against the woke family destroying madness. He's going up against the mass migration madness. He's going up against a load of strategies from the network. But again, it comes back to the Civil War, if there is one. I don't see Trump pushing it. I see him enraging, absolutely enraging the puppets of the network. It seems to me, that's how it strikes me. I mean, if the puppets of the network, the Democrats and the left, just reacted by grumbling and being annoyed and
plenty people on the right just pointing that out,
being angry, there'd be no problem. But look what's happening now. There was a thing recently came out, and I don't have the details, but I thought it was interesting. There was a Catholic guy, specifically Catholic, that Obama had in a senior role as Obama went after mass migration. And apparently the numbers are that Obama got around 500,000 pushed back out, highly rewarded and decorated this Catholic guy. And no one said a word, really. And now Trump's only had a couple of 100,000. I think the same guy is involved. And there's absolute civil war about it, and all the ICE ministers.
Just shows to show you some people who are not paying as much attention are out there and not knowing the real numbers. So, I mean, he's in Ireland, so he doesn't get most of his news is going to be coming from, at best, people like us.
Social stuff. So I'd ask, what's driving all the anger? Trump's just getting real serious on mass migration, and his claim is criminals, etc. Maybe not, I don't know. But it's the reaction that's driving all the real madness. It strikes me as that way.
Yes, and that Catholic guy I think you're referring to is Tom Homan. He worked
Rings
under
a bell.
Obama.
I only saw it earlier.
He worked under Obama. He got an award while he worked for Obama, and now working for Trump, he gets vitriol and hatred in the MSN. Ian,
They can't take any. There is no wealth or productivity or assets left amongst the American people to take. They just can't take anymore. We are indebted for 4 to 5 generations out. Debts that we can't pay. Now they're figuring out clever, sophisticated ways to, remove some of the debt or excuse some of the debt or just transfer it to some other new system, et cetera, right? All kinds of complex stuff that, Tom Luongo and others talk vastly better than I can. But I don't think they understand the rage that is created when the recommendation as how to deal with the housing crisis, meaning people's inability to afford housing, is a 50-year mortgage. It's created rage amongst a vast number of people. This, financialist regime, the financialist kill chain has stolen a century and a half worth of human productivity. And now they're locking in the steel by this transition to a new currency system, a new financial tokenized currency system, because that's what it's doing. That's locking in a century and a half of steel, of theft, of debts, wealth, asset values created by this vast amount of debt that the average citizens are not going to participate in. that's create, so why is the vitriol and the rage coming? Well, the way in which this faction of the network is trying to address this fundamental problem is to cut out the graft. And that's a very valuable thing that needs to happen. It's a very laudable thing. But just cutting out all of the graft and fraud and corruption doesn't address the fact that 1.5 centuries of Americans' wealth has been stolen. And that wealth is people's lives. It's the actual productivity of people's lives. Stolen and being, formalized in this new financial currency system.
Mhm.
And to that point, I remember a few months ago, there was a lot of talk of whether Trump was for CBDC or not, and there was stuff about the constitutionality of it. That was quite a while back, and it just occurs to me, I haven't heard a whole lot about that in the last couple of months. So is Trump all in with that?
No.
Or not quite all in with that? I'm not sure. I don't know.
I don't think, well, they're doing it through, they don't need a CBDC because they can do many of these types of things through.
Yeah, CBDCs is basically digital ID and virtually a currency that you can't, a cyber-based currency. From what I understand, there's two types of CBDCs. The ones the left wants, and the ones that the American Federal Reserve wants. The American Federal Reserve one wants basically like a giant equivalent of a cryptocurrency. They call it FedNow. And basically, it'll just replace SWIFT, because SWIFT is like still on telephone wires and Fortran computers, right? They want to have a more advanced stuff. The World Economic Forum wants the one that we all fear. And I just maintain if you try to use the kind of digital control they will try to do, people will come up with an alternative system. The black market will thrive. I had a good conversation with Money Circus a little while back about that, where we just talked about like when there's a market, or where there's a market, there's an entrepreneur who's going to get in on it. And whether or not we're trading Pokemon cards or rocks, but if we'll find some alternate physical currency to bypass their system. The black market will always thrive. They think they can get rid of it. They can't.
The stable coin and through access, tokenized. I was just watching Miles Harris do a show on this just before we came on. They can control your access to capital and liquidity. They don't need to have a total programmable CBDC currency, et cetera. It's not necessary. And for all intents and purposes, we have, these types of capital controls now. I mean, look at the bank accounts that are being frozen by certain people, the truckers in Canada, a couple leading peoples like Scott Ritter and some other folks have had their bank accounts frozen, et cetera. So the ability to do much of what people are worried about with CBDCs already exists.
Yeah.
Right. As long as you have money in the banks, that already exists. So most of that is, I believe, personally, is fear mongering. It's to get people in this fear place. Go pay attention to this. Don't pay attention to this other thing we're doing, locking in $100 trillion or $200 trillion of stolen wealth into this new tokenized system where it's going to be virtually impossible for you to ever recover that wealth.
Yeah. And the only extra thing with CBDC, from my perspective, is when they use the banks to go after you, at least for what it's worth, you can go to your bank and they tend to explain what happened. Yeah. Well, the government told us to, or you have to give us these documents. So there's some recourse. With CBDC, your bank will say, we don't know. You're going to have to ring this number in Geneva or East Coast USA, which won't answer. So there isn't even a semblance of like any recourse to justice. But there was another one recently. I don't know if you saw this one. Gold and silver, obviously, the banksters don't want ordinary people buying gold and silver, or silver miners. But recently there was a flurry of activity where the transfers to gold bullion companies by private citizens were stopped by the bank one bank, I think in particular, based on fraud concerns. You know it wasn't fraud concerns. So that's just another example of using the current system to keep the people down.
Yeah.
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 So
And-
again, a century and a half of theft and another century ahead of us of indebtedness, indentured servitude, shall we say. And, I do, again, laud, I don't believe Trump's trying to cause a revolution or civil war. In fact, that faction of the network don't want a civil war.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Faction of the network, right? We're talking about this British group and all these groups there. It's just, there is a faction of the elite. When revolutions happen, it's because of elite divergence. And that's what we're seeing now. Trump is part of elite. That is, he's the head person at the front of that charge. He's part of elite that doesn't want what's coming down the line, and that's what Im's going to talk about.
Or a revolution. That's the last thing they want. Why? Because they would be a target, right? We are at this revolution. If there's a second one in the United States, won't be against the British this time. The redcoats. It's going to be against our own government, who are the British and the redcoats for all intents and purposes.
Right.
In fact, they become more abusive than the British of the 1700s ever imagined. It's even worse over there where you all are. So this faction, of course, doesn't want a civil war revolution. That's also why they come to some agreement with Waltz in Minnesota. More than likely, the deal that was made is we're going to let you keep your stolen wealth. So, Waltz, maybe you've got $1/3 billion that you took out of all the theft and graft, and it's in these accounts, and these structures, et cetera, here, and here.
Yeah, now it's in danger when you lost control of the intelligence agencies. So suddenly these guys are going to be working for the other side, and they're going to tell people there are good people in the intelligence agencies. Most of them are not part of the network, right? So if you know what you're doing, you can get in there and get the information out. And these guys probably have been tracking all this fraud's been already previously tracked and then leaked to the people in the media, so they'll track it down, because the FBI can't get a warrant for that. But once media has it and talked to about it, how is the judge going to turn it down now? Right? Get everyone's blackmail files, as Tom Longo likes to say. White vanilla envelopes have been hitting people's desks ever since Trump came back, or even earlier.
And you're going to keep it, but in order for you to keep it, you're going to back down against the federal government, and you're going to go ahead and act lawfully in your own state. If you don't, then we will take these funds. That's generally what happens, right? These deals get made. The problem is that the people, the actual people, the good, patient peoples, the good, productive peoples, their rage is rising. It's rising, and it's getting to the kind of place where it's almost Reconquista kind of level.
And if you look at Europe,
I had my interview yesterday with Nicole, and she asked me about some stuff, and I'm like, what I was thinking was going to happen when I was explaining Minnesota to her about how it's like this real Marxist revolutionary hornet's nets that the Trump administration, I think, inadvertently stepped into, not realizing what's going on here. And they're only now finally figuring out that they have an entire communist insurgency in the early stages in the United States, where there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of radicalized Marxists in the United States. And when you get that kind of thing, you're going to have problems. And Nicole was like, well, what can we do? Oh, yeah, you could stomp hard on it. You need to stomp hard on it, is my answer. But the problem is Americans aren't ready there. The right has not been radicalized yet enough to do it. So they will become radicalized, because that's what happens when the left pushes. They always are the ones pushing for it. Sometimes they push for good things, but then they start overstepping, and the right just comes back and reaction and crushes it. and often the more conservative society that comes afterwards was way worse than what the guys went into, the reformists went in with. Until, of course, like, look at the French Revolution, how that worked out. So this is what we're going to have to deal with, is that one day the right will be as radicalized as the left is now, and that's when the shooting starts.
But now we might talk about that more later, but just even as an example, so Spain now is going to give citizenship by a royal decree to 500,000, I think, illegal migrants. I mean, that's almost not just doing something very wrong, but it's almost rubbing the people's noses in their own problems.
Yep.
It's a declaration of war against the people. Either the people rise up and do a reconquista in Spain again, right? And the same here, or the people demonstrate that there isn't the spirit of fight in them, and the network does whatever it wants to.
Yeah. Now we will, if I can come in, we will talk about Europe in the subsequent conversation. I want to keep it to the United States here, right? And I think one of the things that shows that Trump is not working in service of the City of London, the network, is how much.
Yeah, we'll have to get into the City of London one of these days. I've seen some document. It's fascinating. This one little square block of London, which is where all the British banks are located. It's a completely separate feudal territory in the way that the some of the islands are, and it's ruled basically by the banks by charter, but from the king or the crown, as a better description, because they've been there a long time, and they are not accountable to the rest of the British kingdom in there, except for having to report to the king and the royal family. It's an interesting place.
Opprobrium they lay upon him, how much he's vilified by the mainstream media. I mean, this whole thing, and I'm sure, you know, as a fellow United Kingdom, you're in Ireland, right? But you will be familiar.
Yeah, I mean, British Isles, as they say.
You'll be familiar.
The Irish rebels will be annoyed at me saying that, but in fairness, in spite of the history, we're now all united, regardless of the history, against the major problem.
Yes,
no question about that.
Yes, but this whole story about how
something Jimmy Dore once said when he was interviewing the Boogaloo Boy, and he said, "We need to get rid of these assholes over here so we can go back to fighting, work together to take out these assholes over here so we can go back to fighting each other like normal."
Of the US has been Britain is US's puppet.
Oh my God.
And the US runs things, and Britain is US's puppet. It's a conversation that I'm familiar with through my days in, you know, the anti-war movement against the Iraq War and Afghanistan War. You know, Britain is just doing whatever US does, and it should have its own independent foreign policy. Well, actually, Britain's really pissed off because the US is not doing what Britain wants it to do. It's like Alex Craner, he introduced me to Master Blaster from one of the Mad Max movies. This giant blind thug with a dwarf on the shoulders of the thug, and the dwarf is the brains telling the thug what to do. And now it seems that one way of looking at this is Trump has thrown the dwarf off, and the dwarf is really pissed. Pissed.
We signed divorce papers. We filed for divorce 250 years ago this year. And now we're finalizing the divorce.
Right.
And the bitch is pissed.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me, because I saw something a couple of years ago, guys. Could have been even 2020 during the COVID scam. But Trump was in, and I noted it. There was a manager for decades, and I just noticed subtle stuff about people's interactions. And the reason I thought Trump was really pissing off the network, one of the early signs, well, like you said, Rich, the media, the globalist media, is attacking him around the clock. And they wouldn't need to do that much attacking to give him credibility as controlled opposition. They simply wouldn't need to. It's been off the scale. That was one thing. The other thing is, I saw him coming out of Davos a few years ago, and Schwab was trying to keep up with him and running around and clearly nervous and clearly upset and clearly against Trump as he chaperoned him out. And all the media there, and Trump was saying, we're going with America's great again. We're not doing your globalist crap. And he was saying all this stuff. And Schwab was clearly, visibly, authentically angry with Trump and very uncomfortable. And he can't feign that. Mm-hmm. And he wouldn't try and feign that to give Trump credibility. Trump is not maybe in all our interests. But
I was frozen. I've been having some internet connectivity issues with this particular computer for some reason, even though it's hardwired into the modem.
But there's something, he is pushing against the major organism in some manner.
He's doing what Putin did starting in the 2000s and what Xi had to do starting in 2011. It's the only way. It's the only way that America survives at all.
Yep. So we got to understand a little bit of history here. Putin is Trump and Putin are similar in the sense that they both trying to save their countries from outside this globalist elite or the pie table or the network of all these bankers and other people, all these focuses of corruption, the somewheres versus the anywheres, as some people call them, the laptop class, maybe sometimes. So I'm part of the laptop class, so I don't think that always works as well. But yeah.
And unfortunately, I know a lot of people don't, but these things always go to blood. Somebody makes a mistake, someone goes too far, and then it just spirals because there is genuine, absolute wrath and growing rage about the theft and about, yes, we can stop the ongoing theft, the ongoing graft, the ongoing alimony payments that we've been paying to Europe for 80 years. And the child support we've been paying to the United Kingdom for 200 some odd years. All of that's coming to an end, but it doesn't deal with the hundreds of trillions of dollars that have already been stolen. Mm-hmm. And how do the Americans get that back? Which probably won't. It's in offshore structures, it's in offshore systems, it's being tokenized now, which is providing additional layers of near impossibility for recovery. And that rage is building and building and building. And I know, again, Tom Luongo and others talk about all these sophisticated things, but one of the problems as a human being, and as an engineer and as a business guy, right, it's complexity. Once things get beyond a certain amount of complexity, they're not real anymore. They don't even have the ability for us to believe that there's any reality to them, and so we just don't participate.
Yeah.
Why? Which is why they flooded us with all these people, to create this antjar so that we spend the next 300-400 years fighting each other. And this gets to us here in the United States and to Europe. How long did it take from the Islamic invasions until the first Crusades? 300 years? Almost 400 years? Mm-hmm. And then the Reconquista took even longer, and we were still fighting in the 1600s in Eastern Europe, right? So my concern right now is that if we don't get some kind of a...
And by Eastern Europeans, the area around the Balkans. Just making sure people don't think that. You might be thinking, what? Muslims are up in Poland? No, they were going up basically up to the fighting Austrian-Hungarian Empire over Greece and Yugoslavia and Bulgaria and Romania. That's how far they got. Now, that being said, look who came back and rescued all those people. It was a lot of Russians. And just like Putin, they didn't conquer those places. They set up all these little inter-kingdoms.
Civil War revolution. We're going to have a Islamic-like occupation of the United States that causes conflict for the next 300-400 years.
Well, I think
quite aside from the financial theft, right?
I hope the United States has been saved from that. And I speak as a Muslim immigrant in Britain. I think, and we'll cover this in the subsequent conversation about what's going on in the British Isles and Europe. It doesn't look so.
Yeah, people worry about that kind of thing happening here in Canada, but I look at it and I say, for every Muslim we brought a Hindu and a Sikh, and those people all three of those people do not like each other at all, for good reason. Oh,
rosy for Europe in that regard. But one other thing I want to say about where Trump is, controlled opposition or not, is his whole I don't.
I mean, for God's sake, Canada has terrorist problems. It does not come from our Muslims. They come from the Hindus and Sikhs. They blew up an airliner once. That's how bad they hate each other.
think the globalists want him to prevail in the United States because it shows an example of what could be possible. And that's the same deal with the British, where they killed President McKinley and President Lincoln and President JFK and possibly FDR and a few others, right? Because they didn't want them to prevail. Same reason the French are out to dethrone Traore, because they don't want him, that model, to prevail. Same reason why they got rid of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, because he was putting in the American system of political economy.
Yes, the American system of political economy. That's something we're going to hear more about, is what Trump is trying to do. And people are doing it in more places. And it is the anti-British, or as they would call British, City of London, this imperialist, capitalist, extractive regimes that are around the world, centered in Europe.
Me as well. But the other the British don't like Russia. Russia is too big, needs to be broken up, and in the unsaid, so we can better extract the collateral within Russia. And Trump just won't play their game.
Yeah, terribly sorry, Rich. I don't. Yes, of course, the natural resources are important, but the way in which these folks' minds work, they want to break up Russia so they can have smaller states to play off against each other.
Correct.
Yes.
It's why they want to break up the United States, so that they can play the states. They can't have these large continent-sized kinds of nations, because that's a power that they, physical power, as we're seeing in Ukraine. If they need to, they can go to war and they can crush you and destroy you. Yeah. Same thing with the United States. So they move to break us up, flood us with a whole lot of people that don't belong here, that'll never be part of us, never fit in. This isn't, when I say Reconquista, I don't mean just against Islam or Muslims, right? This is a broader thing. Their intention, though, is always to break up the states so that the smaller states, they can play off against each other ad nauseum forever. Yeah. And then that way,
I always maintain British really screwed it up in the American Revolutionary War. All they had to do was to give every state or province, I guess it would be then, and basically make them into, give them representation in England, let them form their own like MPs and send them over to Britain, and always make sure Virginia had more seats than anyone else, because that would really, you would be driving the divide in the United States, because Virginia was considered at that time a big power of the United States, and they would not give up. As we saw in the U.S. Civil War,
resources at very low prices, and they get the individuals in those smaller states to basically at slave wages extract those resources.
Yeah, and it's the classic divide and conquer, and it's so frustrating that the vast majority, because they've been programmed to think that anything relating to powerful, influential people working against our interest in a coordinated way, any of that is a, quote, conspiracy theory. It's been the most effective psyop of all time, I think. So ordinary people can't see the obviousness. I mean, I had a guy, just as an example, and he was talking about, but Russia's a threat to Europe and even Ireland in the worst case, right? And I'm laughing. And I say, okay, I'll do a simple thing. Your media, all of our media, the RTE Guide, the Irish Times, the whole lot of them, and all across the Western world, screamed at us that Russia was pathetic. Russia was losing. Russia had 1 million dead. Putin had cancer. What a mess. What a joke. And on a dime, they switched around and said, Russia can come and Putin can come and just take over the whole of Europe, even though he was an idiot who couldn't even do Ukraine.
Yeah. Get your stories straight, people.
Right in his backyard, a little country. And I said, so you know for a fact, you don't have to be an engineer here. You know they're lying to you whole scale and fully on pretty much everything to do with that. And the person had to think, and they didn't have words. So I broke through But you got to break through with the rest of them. God Almighty, it's
Well, that's
pathetic.
that's the piece I wrote yesterday about how powerful cognitive dissonance, cognitive biases are, and how they're used, especially by, for the ones who are either cowardly or just don't want to get involved. And those circuits are so powerful. And I've seen people, trained people, look at evil in the face and not see it, because it would require the rewiring of the brain and their sense of reality. And so they look at right at it and they can't see it.
Yeah, which is the challenge for all of us, because I read that article, absolutely brilliant article, but it got me thinking, well, where am I not seeing something that's right in front of my nose? Because otherwise I'm fooling myself if I think, oh no, I got the truth now. I mean, I do think I've got the truth, but I also get that I could be fooling myself here.
But on a positive note, Reg, if you're interviewing and discussing things openly, there's a great book called Mindset, by the way, everyone should get, about closed mindset and open mindset. It's not political, it's brilliant psychology. But if you're relatively open, which you obviously are, you're interviewing guys like EM, or even talking to me, or Craner, and just put together a stable of people who are unbiased, with sharp minds, with geopolitical knowledge, you're not going to miss much. I mean, we're here arguing about whether Trump is fully in with them or partially. We're down to the finer points. No, I wouldn't worry about missing much worth a damn. I think I could be naive, but I wouldn't worry. I have the whole Maverick network as well, all the hedge fund managers, investment guys, you guys. I mean, once you've got a great network that you've validated, I think you're pretty immune to major blind spots.
That's fabulous, Ivor. And this, what I offer on this channel, is a great network with both of you, and Alex Trainer, and Tom Luongo, and Susan Cookinder, and Blaine Holt. And it's a growing stable.
Yep. And I hopefully will one day be among those key people. I play my cards right. Anyways, that's the video we have for today. I'm off tomorrow to have a echocardiogram in the morning, and then I'm off to the Conservative Convention in Ontario for this. Basically, it's our state convention. So I appreciate there seem to be a couple listeners in the background listening to this. And like I said, I plan on getting back into doing this more on a daily basis starting next week after I come back from the conference and kind of get away from all of this. So if you enjoy this kind of stuff and want to see more, like, share, and subscribe. Retweet me on your social media platforms. Let me know what's going on. Thank you very much. Have a good day.